friends, welcome to CEC Gurukul live lecture. Dear friends, this is our another session on career counseling called Pratibha Sambardhan. Dear friends, we try to give you knowledge on different areas where you can make your career, where you can be blessed to have a road ahead. So friends, in this session today, we are going to talk on econometrics. Now, you must be wondering what econometrics is. We would be telling you in detail how you can make your careers in econometrics. And for this discussion, we have with us in our studios a student motivator, a youth motivator, and he is none other than our a young student who would be giving his introduction first and would be explaining us in detail what econometrics is. So, dear friend, first we would like to have your introduction, and we would like to tell everyone that we have with us a young student, a motivator with us. First of all, tell your name and tell us what is the subject you are going to talk in detail.
Thanks a lot. So, my name is Archit Laskar. I'm a student of 11th grade. And I'm pretty much here to talk about econometrics. It's a very fascinating field of study, and I'd like to talk about it today. So, I'll basically just jump into what econometrics exactly is. I'll just give an introduction to econometrics first of all. So, it's basically a field of study which analyzes different aspects of the economy. It can, it basically determines relationships between different variables in an economy, and also it tries to quantify these relationships in mathematical terms. So, for example, it could analyze the relationship between income and expenditure. It could also analyze the relationship between the minimum wage and the level of unemployment. So, it basically analyzes this cause and effect between different variables. It tries to quantify these relationships using different methods like statistics, mathematical methods, etc. It is a very data-driven field of study. It uses different weapons like frequency distribution, probability theory, and statistical inference. It basically tries to quantify these relationships. So, for example, like I talked about income and consumption. So, you could say that so basically economics tries to quantify these relationships in mathematical terms. So, for example, it could conduct a study and then determine that an increase in the income of a person by $1 would increase their consumption by 95 cents. So, that's an example of how it tries to solve these relationships by quantifying them. It is also used to test hypotheses, these underlying economic theories which are present, and it tries to find cases in the real world using data-driven techniques to check whether these theories are valid or not. It is also used to forecast future trends in economic activity. So, it could find these relationships between variables. It could find exactly like how much a change in one variable would affect another variable, and then it could forecast future trends in the economy. This has many impacts in different fields. For example, policy making, finance, labor, etc. It could help ministries to understand the economy better, to make better policies, to increase to improve growth, to improve welfare, etc. So, it has a huge role in policy making, as well as finance. Finance, for example, investment banks, hedge funds, individual investors, mutual funds, they need a lot of knowledge about the market before they can put their money to in any asset. They need to know the future of an asset, whether it's going to go up, down, whether the value is going to stay the same. So, econometrics basically it finds relationships between variables to forecast future trends, and this even works in markets, which also helps in the finance field. I'll talk about the two types of econometricians that are present. One is a theoretical econometrician. This econometrician is very heavily focused into economic theory. He or she doesn't really delve into much of statistics, much of data, much of mathematical methods, but he or she just comes up with the basic economic theory, the underlying hypotheses, which can later be tested by applied econometricians. Applied econometricians, they have a very strong knowledge of data driven techniques, mathematical models, economic models, statistical inference. They basically survey large data sets and find out whether the underlying economic theory is true or not. Now I'd like to move on to explaining a term which is heavily used in economic analysis. It's called regression. It is basically a method to identify and quantify relationships between two variables, two or more variables also. It is used to predict the future outcomes of economic events. The two types of regression are simple linear regression and multiple linear regression. So simple linear regression is regression where you're analyzing the outcome of a variable, and that variable is only influenced by one like by another variable. So there's only one variable which is influencing the outcome of another variable. So for example, if you're analyzing the average income of a person, and you survey that through the lens of the years of education which they've had. So you're finding out the outcome of the average income of a person only through the lens of the years of education that they've had. So that's an example of simple linear regression. Multiple linear regression is when you're analyzing a variable with the help of multiple variables in the background. So it's when multiple variables are affecting one particular variable. So again, if you take the example of annual income of a person, you could analyze that through years of education, and you could also analyze through that through the years of real world experience or practical experience they've had. So here there are two variables, years of education and real world experience, like the number of like the years of experience that they've already had in this field. So here there are two variables which are being analyzed to determine a single variable. So that's an example of multiple linear regression. So now I'll basically move on to the different steps that are involved in econometric analysis. So this is what an applied econometrician does to test the underlying hypotheses, and it also includes the basic theory which the theoretical econometricians come up with, that the applied econometricians basically put to the test. So step one is basically the job of the theoretical econometrician. They come up with a hypothesis or a theory or a suggestion of some sort pertaining to the economy, which basically describes the relationships between two or more variables, the association, and it also tries to give the magnitude and sign of the relationship. And this step is very heavily focused in economic theory. So this is the job of theoretical econometricians. As I said, they need to have a very good understanding of economic theory to come up with a suggestion which can later be tested in the next steps. So for example, an example could be a theoretical econometrician could use his knowledge of economic theory and say that the relationship between minimum wage in a country and the employment rate is a positive ratio, is a positive relationship, which means that an increase in minimum wage would also lead to an increase in the employment rate. And he could specify this relationship as a 1-to-1 ratio. That means say a 1% increase in minimum wage would lead to a 1% increase in employment rate. This basically means that he's specifying the sign, which means positive, which means like both are directly proportional, and also the magnitude, which is the 1-to-1 ratio. That means a 1% increase in minimum wage would also lead to a 1% increase in employment rate. So again, step one is just a basic hypothesis or a suggestion which a theoretical econometrician comes up with, which can later be tested by applied econometricians. Okay, now I come to step two. Step two is basically the job of applied econometricians. They basically take the underlying theory or the hypotheses which the theoretical econometricians came up with, and they try to come up with a mathematical model to define this theory. So they use equations, inequalities, etc. They have different variables in an equation to determine the outcome of the dependent variable. So generally they assume that the relationships between variables are linear, which means that a change in the independent variable would lead to a directly proportional change in the dependent variable as well. So for example, if you plot a graph between the dependent and independent variable, so generally you'd have a straight line. The relationship would be a straight line. So yeah, so this step basically just focuses on coming up with a mathematical model to define the relationship using equations. So algebra is a big part of this step. They also have, so I'd also like to add that in these equations, they usually add a variable which is called a catch-all variable. It is added in equations. It is basically used to account for all those influences which are unknown or absent or too complex for us to understand. So we basically use this variable called catch-all variable. It's basically called, it's similar to a random error. So it's supposed to average to 0. So if you take 10 cases, there'll be this catch-all variable which will have different values in each case, but we assume theoretically that this will average to 0 because these are unknown, complex or random. So again, I'll recap step 2. So step 2 is basically a step where the applied econometricians, they take the underlying theory which is given by the theoretical econometricians, and they try to make a mathematical or economic model out of it using equations and variables. Coming to step 3. Step 3 is a heavily data driven and statistical procedure which also uses a lot of econometric software. So there are certain unknown parameters in the equations whose values we don't really know, and to determine these values of these unknown parameters, step 3 is used, where we basically use economic software. We go through historical data and then we come up with definite values for these parameters which can be plugged in these equations to give you a more accurate output. So this step is also easiest due to software. Modern software is so intelligent and fast that you can just survey large data sets, historical data sets really quickly and just come up with these values like almost in an instant. It's very fast. So again, recapping step 3. Step 3 is basically a statistical procedure, a data driven procedure where we use economic software to go through historical data and come up with the values of unknown parameters in the equations to improve the accuracy. Okay. Step 4 is probably the most important step. Here you basically check if the equation or the economic model that we came up with is valid at all, if it is significant, if it makes sense at all. So we check whether the consistency of the outcomes, if the outcomes are consistent with the underlying economic theory. And here so basically we have an I'll give you an example. So if we have an econometric model and then we've checked the unknown parameters, we've come up with an equation, everything is done. So in step 4, we'll basically check if the outcomes are consistent with this equation or this economic model that we've come up with, and if it's actually valid and if it makes sense or not. If the outcomes are somewhat off, the econometrician also uses this step as feedback and then can go back to correcting or modifying his previous model to come up with a more accurate one. So again, step 4 is basically just a testing phase to check if the economic model we came up with is valid or not, if it makes sense or not, if there's any significance of it or not. So these are the 4 stages of econometric analysis. an economic model passes all 4 stages, the result is basically a tool which can be used in various fields depending on what the subject is. You can this economic tool could be used by policymakers to improve the economy, provide welfare, etc. It could also be used by investors or banks to make more important decisions, to know like which assets we should put our money in, stuff like that, and also ministries to make better laws and basically improve the existing conditions. Okay, so now I'd like to transition into what an aspiring econometrician should do in school, what subjects he should take, what books he should read, etc. So this is what an aspiring econometrician should do in school to have a potentially successful career path in the future. So I'll start off with what subjects an aspiring econometrician should focus on in school. Firstly, I think the most important one is mathematics, especially for an applied econometrician. In particular, the most important topics in mathematics are calculus. Calculus is really important. You use derivatives, and integrals in economic modeling and analysis. So as I talked about in step 3, step 3 is heavily dependent on econometric analysis, and step 2 as well. So when you basically come up with a model for the economic theory or the underlying hypotheses, calculus is a big part of it. Also algebra obviously, because you're making equations using the different variables to come up with associations and quantify them. So just the concept of an equation requires a very strong understanding of algebra. Then the third one I'd say is statistics, in particular probability theory, statistical inference, regression analysis, etc. It's really fundamental for step 3 in econometric analysis, where you basically check historical data and plug them into current equations to improve accuracy. The statistics is a big part of that. The second subject after mathematics is economics, especially for theoretical econometricians. As I said, in the 4 steps of econometric analysis, first step is when the theoretical econometricians, they come up with an underlying theory or hypothesis or a suggestion which connects 2 or more variables and comes up with a relationship between them. So that is very heavily focused on economic theory. So economics is a very important subject to come up with such stuff. This would include both micro and macroeconomics. Microeconomics is when you survey individual units in an economy, like households, firms, governments, etc. Macroeconomics is when you deal with the behavior of the economy as a whole. So you deal with subjects like inflation, unemployment, economic growth, business cycles, etc. So yeah, this is the significance of economics as a subject in school. Third, I'd like to say the most important subject is computer science, particularly in languages like R, Python, Strata, etc. So technical knowledge in these subjects would be extremely beneficial, especially for step 3 in econometric analysis, where you survey data sets like historical data to improve the accuracy of your equations. So using R, Python, Strata, etc., you can develop economic software, use like query data sets to survey these historical data really quickly and come up with accurate outcomes. So yes, this is computer science could be really beneficial in economic modeling as well as spreadsheets. This could be used for statistical analysis when you're surveying historical data as well. So now I'd like to move past the subjects which you should take and try to come up with try to talk about the different courses or exams you should take, basically the extracurricular stuff in school. So firstly, I'd like to start off with AP exams, specifically in calculus, statistics, economics, micro and macroeconomics. So these are basically the core subjects which are involved in econometrics. So giving AP exams in these subjects, uh, statistics, economics, calculus, computer science, etc., can really prepare you for higher studies and really give you an edge over your competitors when it comes to the understanding in these subjects. Apart from this, I think you can also use a variety of online tools like Coursera, edX, Khan Academy, etc. So courses from these platforms would really help you develop a very strong understanding about these subjects like stats, maths, computer science, economics, etc. So this again gives you a huge edge over your competitors. YouTube as well. YouTube is a great tool. It's free, obviously. It's a great tool for free education, and you're basically getting an edge for free. So YouTube is again a great tool for developing a strong understanding in these subjects. Next, I'd like to talk about internships or job shadowing. So internships or job shadowing, they give you a ton of real world experience or practical experience in the field. You could basically know about what econometricians actually do and make you slightly accustomed to the climate of or the work environment of an econometrician. Job shadowing is basically probably more realistic for a school student, as econometric firms would probably not give you an internship at this age, but job shadowing is a great tool. It's where you basically you observe or follow an employee as they go about their day. You can observe how they work, what they do, and basically it just gives you a ton of real world experience or practical experience in the fields. Gives you good insights which you can later on use to your advantage. Next, I'd like to talk about books. There are certain books for a school student which would really develop their knowledge and give you an edge again, as I said. So a few books are Introduction to Econometrics by Jeffrey Woolridge, Econometric Analysis by William Green, and Applied Regression Analysis by Harry Smith and Richard Draper. So these books, they really give you a really good introduction.
And with this note, we would like to thank Mr. Archit for giving us such wonderful session. And we have never heard of what econometrics is, and with the help of you, we are able to understand what econometrics could play, how it could play a very important role in different areas, like you said about investment, as well as the banking area and the other elite area where the complex problems can be solved with the help of the econometrics. So, Mr. Archit, thank you once again for giving us this wonderful session, and we would like to study more, know more what econometrics is, what it is, and it is beneficial for the students who would be watching us live, and we would be having more insight from you. So dear friends, we believe that you have learned a lot, and we would be discussing more about this topic. So keep watching us.